debate, the honourable member for Regina-Wascana.
Bravo, bravo.
Well, thank you, Madam Speaker, and as this is my first speech in this chamber in the new Parliament, I would like to take a minute to thank the voters of Regina-Wascana for electing me to this chamber. It certainly is an honour and a privilege to be able to represent the interests of Regina-Wascana in the House of Commons.
Yeah.
I would also like to thank all of the volunteers on my campaign team who worked so hard putting up lawn signs, stuffing brochures into mailboxes, and knocking on doors to making sure that, that the campaign was a success. And of course, I have to thank my family, particularly my mom and dad. I'm sure there have been many times when they wish that their son would just choose a more normal hobby other than pursuing a seat in Parliament, but I'm glad it finally worked out for the better. I would also like to thank my brother Brad, his wife Kathy, and my nephews Mason, Michael, and Mark. They all had the opportunity to join me for my swearing-in ceremony, and it certainly was a special family occasion.
Bravo.
And now I would like to say a few words about Bill C-4. Madam Speaker, on March 28th, 2019, the Western Producer Farm newspaper ran an editorial about agriculture policy. The Western Producers Editorial Board said, quote, "2 years ago, the federal government identified agriculture as a key sector for growth in exports," unquote. So, considering the high quality of our Canadian dairy products and the priority that this government gave to expanding agriculture exports, it came as a complete surprise to me that the new NAFTA, the new free trade agreement that this government recently negotiated with the United States and Mexico, had a serious flaw. This flaw, a concession made to the Americans at the expense of the dairy farmers in my province of Saskatchewan and thousands of other dairy producers across the country, is a real head-scratcher. Mr. Speaker, it is puzzling to me and my fellow Conservative colleagues on the International Trade Committee why this government would kneecap our hard-working dairy producers by bargaining away their ability to increase dairy exports under the new NAFTA. I think it's important for Canadians to realize that the new Canada-US-Mexico Free Trade Agreement does not just limit the ability of dairy farmers to export to the United States and Mexico, it limits their ability to export to Japan or China or Europe or anywhere in the world. Yesterday, the International Trade Committee heard detailed testimony from a panel of government experts on Bill C-4. These experts included Canada's chief negotiator for the new NAFTA, Mr. Steve Verhul, and Mr. Aaron Fowler, chief agriculture negotiator and Director General of Trade Agreements and Negotiations from the Department of Agriculture and Agri-Food. At committee, I asked Mr. Fowler to clarify whether or not the new export tariff that our dairy farmers will soon have to pay included only the United States and Mexico, or did the dairy export tariff apply to Canadian exports to the rest of the world? Mr. Fowler confirmed that the agreement applies to Canada's exports to the rest of the world. When I asked Mr. Fowler if there was a similar provision under the old NAFTA or the Trans-Pacific Partnership or our trade deal with the European Union, Mr. Fowler said, quote, "I am aware of no similar provision in any of our other trade agreements," unquote. Then I asked the negotiating team to provide some insight into how the dairy export limit made it into the new NAFTA. Mr. Fowler said that the U.S. was concerned about new, innovative Canadian dairy products and that Canadian exports of these products were displacing American dairy products from markets that they, the Americans, traditionally exported to. I appreciate the detailed answers that Canada's negotiating team provided to the committee on how truly innovative our Canadian dairy farmers have become in recent years in specialized products that Canadians can export around the globe. But in the end, Mr. Speaker, it was up to this government to negotiate a better free trade agreement, or at least not a worse agreement, with the U.S. and Mexico, not impose a new worldwide limit on our dairy exports. This Liberal export limit will cut farm revenue, Madam Speaker, and farm families need this extra money. Better margins and increased profitability on each and every dairy farm is more important now than ever because dairy farmers and, in fact, other producers across Canada have to come up with thousands of additional dollars to pay for the Liberals' carbon tax. Madam Speaker, it is very troubling that this government can prioritize the expansion of farm exports on one day, only to limit them the next. During negotiations, why did our trade representatives, who are working on a North American trade deal with the US and Mexico, buckle under pressure from the Americans and agree to limit exports to the rest of the world on dairy products? Dairy products that could have been sold to hungry and thirsty Japanese and Chinese and European customers that were not even parties to this trade agreement. Why didn't anyone catch the significance of this concession, that is, the imposition of a limit on our dairy exports, before it was too late? So, Madam Speaker, it is my sad duty to report to the dairy farmers of Sask Milk, who came to Parliament Hill yesterday to brief me and my Conservative colleagues, that their analysis of the Liberals' new NAFTA is unfortunately correct. This Liberal government did, in fact, cave to the demands of the Americans at the negotiating table to limit Canada's dairy exports to hungry, thirsty, paying customers across the globe who live in nations that are not even parties to this new NAFTA agreement between Canada, the US, and Mexico.
Questions and comments, questions et commentaires. The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary of the Government House Leader.
Yes, thank you, Madam Speaker. I think that what the member is missing out on, I think, a fairly significant point here, and that is the supply management is something in which means a great deal to farmers in all regions of this country. And it was the United States that was hopeful that Canada would abandon supply management. And I'm very happy to say that we have a government that, from a party perspective, it was the Liberals that started supply management, brought it in, and it's been the Liberals that have continuously fought to ensure that we continue to have supply management. If the member were to check with his dairy farmers, he will find that the overwhelming, vast majority of them understand and appreciate the importance, Madam Speaker, of the supply management and having those quotas, because this is the way in which we can produce the type of quality product and protect the industry as a whole. Would he not say that that is a major gain for Canadians to have in terms of certainty going forward with supply management in this agreement?
Honourable Member for Regina-Wascana.
Yeah. Yes, well, I would like to thank the honourable member for his question. As I mentioned in my speech, it was the responsibility of this government to negotiate either a better deal for Canada or at least not a worse deal. I had the opportunity to meet with representatives from Sask Milk who came here to Parliament Hill, and they were really excited about opportunities to export their products around the world. And now those opportunities have been taken away by the failings of our Liberal government in the NAFTA negotiations. So it certainly is unfortunate that the Liberals were unable to obtain either a better deal or at least not a worse deal.
Questions et commentaires, questions and comments. L'honorable député de...
The Honourable